If you've been dealing with chronic health issues of any kind that you haven't been able to find the cause of or actually resolve, and especially if you have symptoms in multiple body systems or if you have multiple different chronic health conditions, mold toxicity or biotoxin illness may be the thing you've been missing that underlies all of it. In this video, I'm going to delve into why exposure to a water damaged building can cause so many different types of chronic symptoms and conditions, and why that can look different from person to person and exposure to exposure. I'm Dr. Karen Curitan, and I'm a naturopathic doctor and specialist in mold illness and nervous system health. And I'm passionate about sharing this information because I lived with many different chronic symptoms and conditions for over 15 years before I discovered the root causes. And for me, mold toxicity and nervous system dysregulation were the big drivers of it. And had I not discovered that, I would still be extremely sick today because no amount of symptom management with supplements, medications, or diet changes, lifestyle changes, etc., is the same as actually getting well. And when the cause is not being addressed, unfortunately, health issues usually get worse over time, which is exactly what happened to me until I really figured out what the problem was and addressed it. And I don't say this to scare you. I share this to empower you to finally get to the bottom of your health condition so you can actually recover. Over my time of over a decade of treating patients with complex chronic illness, I have discovered that mold toxicity and biotoxin illness is one of the top two drivers of chronic illness that is not discovered and not addressed. And so I have people who come to me who have been trying to rebalance their gut for 5 or 10 years with other approaches, or who have been dealing with an autoimmune condition or something like that that they can't get under control, or hormonal imbalances, or mast cell activation and histamine issues, or food intolerances, or allergies. And they come and they say, I worked with all these other doctors and I did all these other things, including with some of the great functional medicine doctors, but I'm no better than when I started. Or I made a little progress and then it regressed again. Or I've actually gotten worse over time. And this is one of those things that I often discover is the reason why they've been stuck, why they can't get well. So let's get into this so you can see why, if you've been living with any kind of chronic health issue, you may want to consider whether your environment has been a part of the problem or all of the problem. Okay, so one of the reasons mold toxicity often gets missed is because it doesn't look the same from person to person or exposure to exposure. And we're going to talk all about why that is. It's because, as you're going to see, no two water damaged buildings are the same, and no two bodies are the same. And those two things combined lead to a myriad of potential presentations of biotoxin illness. So being exposed to a water damaged building can cause many different chronic symptoms and conditions because it isn't just an exposure to mold spores. So when somebody is being exposed to a water damaged building, they're also being exposed to the byproducts of that mold that's growing in their environment and also dying in their environment. So some of these byproducts are things like mycophenolic acid, which is a really potent immune suppressant that they've actually made a drug out of, volatile organic compounds, alcohols, aldehydes, and fragments of the spores when they die. All of those are in the air, in the environment, and are coming into our bodies when we're in a water damaged building. And they all have negative physiological health impacts. Number two, mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are toxins that are produced by certain types of molds to kill the competition, basically. And unfortunately, those mycotoxins also have strong detrimental effects on our own bodies. The molds are primarily using those to kill and outcompete other molds. But there are many different types of mycotoxins, and what ones are in your environment are going to depend on what molds are growing in that water damaged building and whether that mold feels threatened enough to be producing those toxins at that time. So that's what I mean. No two water damaged buildings are the same, right? One water damaged building may be having really high levels of aspergillus species growing that produce certain kinds of toxins. Another one may be having Stachybotrys growing, which is producing trichothecenes, different types of mycotoxins than Aspergillus produces. And then some buildings may be having tons of different types of molds growing, all of which are pissed that the other molds are there and they're all producing their various toxins. And you can have lots of different types of toxins in one environment. So it really depends on the environment, what that person's being exposed to, and therefore what kinds of negative health effects they might be having from their exposure. And then the third thing in water damaged buildings that really affects people's health is that usually molds are not the only things that are excited about there being plenty of food and water around for them. Certain types of bacteria really like to overgrow in those conditions, in conditions where there's dampness and plenty of organic matter for them to eat. And so some of those also make inflammatory or toxic compounds. So you may hear about things like endotoxins and actinomycetes, and those are the kinds of things that we're talking about when we're talking about bacteria. And, mold spores alone can cause allergies and asthma and other allergic like conditions. And a lot of people know that mold can be associated with those things. But mold spores can also infect the human body. They can colonize, they can set up shop, usually in the sinuses and digestive tract, where there's plenty of food for them. There's always moisture, and it's a nice, dark, safe environment for them. And there they can basically cause ongoing infections. And when fungus sets up shop in our bodies, that is not something that the body usually is able to resolve very easily on its own. And that's especially true when you are still living in the moldy environment, because usually in a moldy environment, you're going to be having some issues with your immune system being suppressed by the bacteria and fungi that are overgrowing there. So when it infects the human body, it can then cause all kinds of other inflammatory problems because, as you can imagine, the body knows that fungus doesn't belong growing there. And so it is upset about it, and it's inflaming to try to get rid of the mold that's growing there. But mold is actually really impressive in terms of how it can evade the immune system and continue to grow in our bodies once it has made its way in and it has set up shop. Okay. Mold spores also produce and excrete into the environment other compounds when they're growing. And I mentioned a couple of these already, but these also have physiologic effects like mycophenolic acid. Like I said, this is a compound that's produced by certain molds when they are growing, and it's always produced when those molds are growing. And so there can be lots of it in the environment, and it can be a really potent immune suppressant. It's actually been developed as a drug to prevent organ rejection when somebody has an organ transplant. So that is how potent some of these byproducts of mold growth can be. Some people also say when they're living in a moldy environment that they feel drunk all the time. And that's because one of the byproducts of molds can be alcohols. And so mycotoxins, as I mentioned, like they are called toxins because they are toxic to not just other microbes, but to us. And just like cigarette smoke or pesticides that are toxic to the body or plastics or whatever, these toxins are damaging to the human body. And there are many different types of them. And so they can damage the human body in a bunch of different ways. And unfortunately, the effects are cumulative. Just like smoking cigarettes every day, the longer the exposure goes on, the more negative health impact it has. And so that's something I like people to know, because the sooner you do something about this, the sooner your body has a chance to try to recover and reverse the impacts that these toxins can have. Sometimes the toxins can sort of put the body or the immune system over the edge, and sometimes we end up with really serious things that are harder to reverse, like autoimmune conditions or cancer or things like that. And so I want people to know about this so they can do something early in the process and not get to that point. And then, as we said, there are bacteria and bacterial byproducts that can have negative health effects too. So, as you can see, water damaged or sick buildings, as they're known, are really cesspools of many different types of organisms and compounds that can make us sick. And I'll just summarize this as three main ways that water damaged buildings can negatively affect us. Number one is those organisms and compounds can act as immune irritants that cause allergies and asthma and things like that. Number two, they can have real toxic effects where they can be damaging to cells and body systems. Number three is infectious. The fungi and bacteria in these buildings can start growing in our own body, which our body doesn't like. It knows they don't belong there, and so that can have other negative health effects. And each of these affect the body differently and can cause different chronic symptoms and conditions. And that is why mold related illness can look completely different from one exposure to another. So let's go a little bit deeper into the mycotoxins, which, as I have seen, have been usually the most detrimental to human health in a water damaged building. That doesn't mean the other things are not damaging. It just means that if mycotoxins are present at really high levels, I see them cause the usually the most negative effects. And so, like I was saying, there are many different types of mycotoxins, and different molds produce different mycotoxins, and they can produce more or less depending on how much they feel they need to be defending their territory. So, some of these mycotoxins are neurotoxic, they're toxic to the brain and the nerves. Some of them are immunotoxic, they're toxic to our immune cells. Some are mitochondrial toxic, so they damage the little energy producers that are in every single cell and are necessary for every cell to be able to function and do its job. Some are damaging to the liver and to the kidneys, some to the skin and mucous membranes, like the mucous membranes of your digestive tract and your sinuses. Some are cardiotoxic, some are hormone disrupting, similar to how plastics can look like estrogens to the body. There are certain mycotoxins that can look like estrogens to the body and put us into a very dysregulated hormone state. Some are damaging to the gut microbiome because some of them can have antibiotic like effects. And so we can end up with really severe dysbiosis, SIBO, all kinds of overgrowths of pathogenic bacteria in the digestive tract from a water damaged building and mycotoxins in it. Many are extremely inflammatory because, again, they are damaging to a lot of our tissues, and so the immune system tags them as this doesn't belong here and starts freaking out about not only that they are foreign substances, but also that they are having a damaging effect in the body. And like I said, they can be really suppressive to the immune system in addition to being highly inflammatory, which sounds like those two things are opposed, but both can actually occur at the same time. So somebody can have a really hard time fighting infections and killing cancer cells and things like that, but at the same time be really inflamed and having horrible histamine issues and joint inflammation and mast cell activation disorder and autoimmunity. All those kinds of things can be coexisting. And so when I was being exposed over a very long period of time to different toxic environments, when I was going through school primarily, I was a renter at that time, my symptoms would periodically change. And now looking back, I can correlate that to times when I moved from one environment to another. So sometimes symptoms would improve, or sometimes other symptoms would get worse, or sometimes the whole symptom picture would just flip and change. Like in one environment, maybe I was dealing with the most horrific brain fog and dissociative symptoms possible, and then I moved, and suddenly the dominant symptom was that I was insomniac and having anxiety and swelling all over my body and digestive issues. So I didn't know at that time because I had no awareness of environmental toxicity, but I was being exposed to different things in those different environments, and that is what caused the symptom picture to change. When I look back, it's the only thing that really changed at those times. And so now it's quite obvious. And so I want you to know that if your symptom picture has morphed and changed over time of having chronic symptoms, look back and see, well, did I actually change something in my environment then? Did I move? Did we have a leak? Did I go to a new school? Or I was suddenly spending 8 hours a day? Look for that. You might be able to find a correlation there if your illness has an environmental exposure that is driving it. So, this is one of the main reasons why one person may be dealing with fatigue, brain fog, headaches, swelling, chemical sensitivity, and exercise intolerance from their water damage building exposure, and another person may be dealing with rashes and hives and SIBO and mast cell activation disorder and anxiety, and another person may be having insomnia and food sensitivities and air hunger and POTS. And the next person may be having chronic sinus infections, reactivation of Epstein-Barr virus, really struggling to get rid of colds and flus when they get them, poor wound healing, fungal infections on the skin or in their nails or other parts of the body. And another person may be dealing with PMS and unexplained menstrual changes and suddenly having issues with things like fibroids, fertility issues, adrenal insufficiency, blood sugar instability, all kinds of different presentations. And that can be because all those different people are being exposed to different things in their water damage building, but they're all having a water damage building exposure. The other reason why exposure to a water damage building and all of these various compounds in it can underlie many different types of chronic illnesses and chronic symptoms that present in all different body systems is because the toxins in these environments can damage or cause dysfunction of very foundational processes at a cellular level. Our body is made up of cells, and these cells, while they each have different functions and may all be different, they do have some similar susceptibilities and that they share, such as they all have mitochondria, and mitochondria are very susceptible to damage by environmental toxins, whether those be mycotoxins or heavy metals or certain chemical toxicants. The mitochondria are very susceptible, and some of these toxins can go right into the cell. Mycotoxins penetrate right through cell membranes and can get to those mitochondria and damage them. And so, if you have mitochondrial damage in every cell all over your body, then you may have dysfunction of many different parts of the body. You may be having brain symptoms because those mitochondria are not making enough energy to run their processes of making neurotransmitters and transmitting information. Then you may have gut dysfunction because the cells lining your gut do not have enough mitochondrial function to make all the digestive enzymes they need to make and to repair damage and turn over those cells on a regular basis. You may be having immune dysregulation because your immune cells don't have enough mitochondrial function. And so when you zoom out and you look at the effects that these toxins can have, some of the effects that they have can affect these foundational systems of the body that affect everything else. They can affect every single cell, and they can also affect these higher level body systems like the brain and the nervous system and hormonal regulation and the gut and the immune system and our detoxification capabilities. All of those are so foundational to everything about how the body works that you can imagine how when those things aren't functioning and when multiple of those systems are not functioning, especially, you get all kinds of different imbalances and symptoms because those systems aren't functioning and nothing downstream of them can either. So, one of the things you'll hear me talk about a lot is how deeply these mycotoxins can affect the brain and autonomic nervous system because those are upstream of so many things. So, sleep issues and mood issues are some of the more common symptoms actually that I see from mold and biotoxin related illness. And then if you realize that the brain actually is what is regulating the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is regulating all the automatic functions of your body, like your blood pressure and your breathing and your heart rate and your digestion and your immune communication and signaling and detoxification, repair of your body systems, pain signaling. All of those things are controlled by the autonomic nervous system, which is controlled by the brain. And both the brain and the whole autonomic nervous system are deeply dysregulated from these toxins that can be in our environment. And then that has all these downstream impacts on every other system of the body. So, mold illness often gets missed because clinicians are often just looking for a diagnostic bucket to put someone in, and they're not looking for the cause. They're not looking for the overarching pattern. They're not looking for the why. And so, they're looking just to diagnose somebody with something that's in the diagnostic manual that they can put as a diagnostic code in their chart note, right? So, they're looking for irritable bowel syndrome, mast cell activation syndrome, or POTS, or chronic fatigue syndrome, or fibromyalgia, or anxiety, depression, insomnia, a hormone imbalance, chronic sinusitis, a chronic infection, an autoimmune disease, or chemical sensitivity. And those diagnoses may be accurate descriptions of what's going on, and they are not explaining the why. And they're not looking at why so many systems are being dysregulated in the first place. These are questions that need to be asked if we actually want to get to the point where we can heal someone. And so mold should be considered, or biotoxin illness, or water damage building illness, whatever you want to call it, needs to be considered when symptoms are affecting multiple systems, when symptoms are chronic and no other cause has been found, or other contributors have been found, but addressing those has not resolved the problem. When symptoms began or worsened after a move, a leak, a flood, a renovation, being in a musty building, or having a workplace exposure. If multiple pets or people in the same environment are having health issues, if you feel worse in certain buildings and better away from them, that's a big indicator. If treatments only partially help with alleviating your symptoms or improving them, or they only help for a short period of time and then that stops, if symptoms have been getting worse over time, despite your best efforts to address the issue, if you are becoming increasingly sensitive to foods, supplements, smells, chemicals, or environments, that's a huge indicator. Mold is a big instigator of sensitivities of all kinds. And if there is an ever-growing and confusing pileup of diagnoses that you're acquiring without any unifying explanation, those are all things that should make you go, maybe I should look into whether my environment may be part of the problem. So, in summary, mold toxicity is not one illness because mold exposure is not one exposure. And a water damaged building can contain many different toxins, irritants, organisms, and inflammatory byproducts. And those exposures can affect different systems of the body. One toxin can affect many systems of the body, but layer on top of that there may be many toxins in that environment and you can have a really big issue. And then each person brings a different level of susceptibility and different weaknesses, so to speak, in their health into the environment, right? And that's going to vary from person to person. It's also going to vary from different times in that person's life based on how stressed they are at that time and how many antibiotics they've had by that time in life. And are they going through perimenopause? And, all kinds of other things are going to affect how susceptible they are. So think about that too, because a lot of people will say to me, well, I was probably exposed to mold when I was younger, but I was pretty healthy when I was younger, so it can't be mold, right? No, actually, it very much can be mold, and your susceptibility to it may have increased dramatically over the course of your life and for many different reasons. So, this is why mold related illness can present in so many different ways. And it's why I'm so passionate about helping people to find out if they've been sick for a long time or they've had a lot of unexplained symptoms, that they need to look here. It may not be a convenient answer, of course, but having an answer is better than not having an answer. Having a way to fully recover and not just manage the illness, trust me, is so much better than trying to live with it. And so I hope that this encourages you to look for the hidden driver of your chronic illness if you haven't discovered it yet. The goal of this video is not to blame everything on mold, but it's to stop missing in the environment as a really big contributor to our health and well-being, and to say that it's often the thread that's tying the whole health picture together. So if you think this might be underlying an illness for you, I'm going to share a link below to a questionnaire that you can take to find out how likely it is that mold or a water damaged building is contributing to your illness. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.